Good morning. My name's Annabelle and I'm the Health and Wellness Facilitator for Tauranga. And today we're going to do a presentation on restorative movement and the breath. So restorative movement and the breath. Some of the key learnings that we're going to cover this morning will be using the other two diaphragms, so the vocal and the pelvic diaphragm. And these are used and engaged whilst breathing in restorative movement to stabilize the body and protect from injury. We're going to be learning how the breath is greatly enhanced using the other two diaphragms located in the pelvis and the throat. We're going to be doing some spinal movements to help the shape change action when we're breathing. So we coordinate our breath with our movements, and how restorative movement helps our breath, calms the nervous system, and gently stretches our bodies. And lastly, how effective restorative movement uses mindfulness and how we can help use mindfulness with restorative movement in acceptance of the mind and the body connection. So the first diaphragm that we're going to look at today is the pelvic diaphragm. And the pelvic diaphragm can help engage and use the deep abdominal muscle layers. So when you engage these muscles, you also engage the muscles of the stomach via the myofascial tissue. So that's that connective tissue that surrounds the muscles. When active during the outward breath, so during exhalation, this helps stabilize the main diaphragm upper attachments. When engaged during the in-breath, so during the inhalation, this helps lift the base of the rib cage, allowing more room for air to flow into the lungs. So a good way to practice the pelvic floor diaphragm is if you just concentrate on your exhalation and you begin to extend your exhalation by pulling the belly button in towards the spine. And you find that point where you're pulling in towards the center of the pelvis. So once you find that point, you can then begin to lift the pelvic floor muscles up to that point on the exhalation. So just take an inhale here and then begin to extend your exhalation, pulling the belly button in towards the center of the pelvis to that point, and then lifting the pelvic floor muscles up to that point that you're pulling in. This might take a couple of times to find that point. And sometimes it might be quite difficult, as you might not have used the pelvic floor muscles for a long time. So actually finding the pelvic floor muscles as well. So you don't actually need to contract the buttocks or anything like that. It's actually deep inside that you're lifting up. So the other diaphragm that we're going to use today is the vocal diaphragm. And the vocal diaphragm can be used to give more length to the breath, but also to create a back pressure in the stomach and the chest area, which we will discuss later on. Practicing locking the vocal diaphragm when breathing not only helps calm the nervous system, it also aids in providing your body with postural support. So when practicing breathing, you slightly contract the glottis, which is the space between the vocal cords. This slightly closes the glottis, leaving a small opening. And this allows you to hear your breath like a gentle snoring sound only you can hear. And in yogic terms, this is called Ujjayi breathing. So a way that we can practice this is by trying to say the sound R as in father. So when you breathe, you're trying to say the sound for R, just quietly to yourself as you breathe. And you're just slightly contracting the back of the throat. And that gives you that Ujjayi breathing. So creating a center of gravity. So in restorative movement, all these three diaphragms come together and coordinate with the breath and the movement. The engagement of the other two diaphragms helps protect the spine during long, slow extension and flexion movements. So those are the forward and back bend movements. By creating a back pressure in the stomach and chest area. So this gives more stability and protection from injury by creating an internal center of gravity and redistributing the mechanical stress when moving into these positions. So for example, when you're standing and you're moving into a forward bend, the stress usually comes from the spinal muscles, the posterior muscles, to support the body. But when you engage the other two diaphragms, so the throat and the pelvic floor diaphragms, while you're engaging your breathing muscles, these actually contract the surrounding cavities and the myofascial connective tissue around the muscles, which actually creates an internal center of gravity to the shape. If this center of gravity is not created, then the stress coming from the posterior muscles of the spine, especially the lower back, the body actually resents this, and that is why sometimes we actually hold our breath when we're moving. So by engaging all the diaphragms when moving your spine in restorative movement, you create an internal center of gravity, therefore taking the pressure off the posterior muscles of the spine, especially the lower back, and avoiding injury. So why we coordinate our breath with our movements? So spinal movements are an essential part of the shape change when we're breathing, the shape change action of when we're breathing. Because when we change the shape of our spine on a flexion movement, on a forward bend, we're actually changing the internal shape of our breath. So the abdominals move in, the chest contracts, and there's less space for the breath. Therefore, we exhale in this movement. So when we're doing a forward bend, we're actually exhaling because we're making that shape change of our spine. On the other hand, when the spinal shape changes on extension movements, so on those back bends or when you're lifting up and back, we create more space in the chest. We have more room to breathe in our belly because we're expanding our belly and our ribs, and we're creating just the right environment for a nice inhale breath. So when you increase or decrease one spinal curve, you also decrease or increase another curve because the spine is curved. So when you increase one curve, you're decreasing another curve. This is in the neck, the middle of the back, and the bottom of the back. These are the three curves that we have. So spinal curve movements is reciprocal, i.e. an increase in the thoracic curve automatically decreases the curve in the neck and the lumbar curve, the back, the lower back. So this practice of cat and cow that you can see here helps us to explore this shape change of extension and flexion. So this shape change of spinal flexion, the cat, is when you're pulling your belly button up, you're pushing your hands down, your head's down, and you're really curling up. You take an exhalation. And the spinal extension, the cow, when you're dropping the belly, you're lifting the chest through, you're looking forward, that actually creates an inhalation. These shape changes in the body. So that's why we move to the shape of our breath. Now, depending on how flexible you are, also decides how you change the shape of your breath with your spine. So spinal flexion and extensions, the forward and back bends, are not necessarily forward and back bends. So the relationship of these spinal curves refers to extension and flexion and not the movement of body in space. So it just reminds us to have more awareness of the body when we are flexing and extending our spine. Just because you're in a forward bend you might not be flexing your spine to create that shape for the exhalation. So just as an example here, imagine that you've got a really, really stiff office worker who's been sat at their desk all day, and they're in this kind of hunched position, and they've been like this for years, haven't really done much stretching before. When they go to have a spinal flexion, so when they go to have a back bend, their spine is still in that curved forward bend shape. So they're not really extending, okay? And the same goes for a very, very flexible dancer. When they perform a forward bend, their spine might still be in that extension because they're so flexible. They don't really notice that they actually have to flex, extend their spine, so pull the belly button in. So it's just something to be a bit mindful of when you are doing your restorative practice, to make sure that your spine is in that forward and back bend. Okay. So going on to mindfulness. Mindfulness is so important when we're doing restorative movement. You have to notice how you feel, what you feel, and where you feel it. Mindfulness is associated with breathing and restorative movement, as you need to be aware of your body and the body's sensations such as pain or discomfort, tightness, and just learning to work and move with these sensations. You need to be aware of the center of gravity, so using all your 3 diaphragms as you move. You need to notice how the spine moves, so whether your spine is in that actual extension or flexion movement. You need to know how this affects your breathing. So again, that shape change, noticing that your spine is making that shape change to allow you to either exhale or inhale. And mindfulness also is really important because it also allows you to notice how you feel. So are those restorative movements affecting your central nervous system? Can you feel a shift from the sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic mode of functioning, that rest, digest, and repair state? It's what we want to be in, that's the key. So practicing restorative movement with awareness of how your body moves with the breath creates healthy movement patterns necessary for pain-free restorative movement. By practicing using these 2 diaphragms, you're becoming more aware of your body, you're developing mindfulness and a connection of the mind and body, which may have been lost, therefore helping with acceptance as well as mindfulness. So, our own restorative practice. So, with your own restorative practice, you need to create a yoga practice that is unique to your ability and body. You need to understand your energy baseline, so using pacing to know how much energy you have. You need to practice only when you're feeling well enough to manage light to average activity without post-exertional malaise. And you need to choose the right restorative movement for where you are physically. And of course, there was always a caution with people who have EDF or any other hypermobility disorders. So it's just a little bit of awareness there when you go to practice your restorative movement. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to stop talking for a bit, and I want to play a restorative movement video, which is pre-recorded, that you can do now if you want to, Otherwise, you can do this in your own time if you don't feel up to it. It will be on our website under members meetings, and there are also links to other resources on the meeting notes as well. So other yoga websites that do restorative movement for ME CFS. And if you want to explore more about the breath, sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. If you want to explore more about the breath, there's a really, really good book here. It's called How to Take a Breath. And this is a really good book. It really effectively, clearly explains about using the breath effectively and has great practices for mindfulness and breathing. So that's a really good book. That's actually new to our library. So if you want to be the first one to take it out of the library, just let me know. Next month's members meeting will be on ME awareness.